Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the IHC Candor Workshop Series. My name's Kate Carpenter and I am a clinical quality consultant at the Iowa Healthcare Collaborative. So raise your hand if you were here for Workshop 1 at IMS. Lots of old faces. And raise your hand if you weren't there. Just a couple of us. Okay, cool. So we have a really fun contraption that we didn't have last time that we have this time, and it's called a catch box. And so you can toss this around the room from table to table, and it has a microphone in it. So it's going to be a really fun way for us to capture kind of your comments and questions. So for purposes of our recording, our training video that we're going to keep and be able to use after this workshop series. So let's test it out, shall we?
Okay. Now what do I do?
Introduce yourself, Rhonda.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Reimer from
See
Franklin
how great
General
that works?
Hospital.
Give Rhonda a clap. Okay, so that's our new fun toy for today. We have a few housekeeping notes as we begin the day, so please take a minute, check your cell phones, make sure those are off or on, silent. Restrooms, if you haven't found the restrooms yet, they are straight out the back doors and to your right. There's restrooms located on both sides of the conference center. Continuing education, we're offering 7 hours. Nursing contact hours are available for today's program. You should have received a CE form when you checked in today. So if you did not, raise your hand and we'll get you one. Everybody that has a nursing contact hours form or need one, get one. Okay, very good. Forms must be completed and turned in at the end of the day. You must attend the full day to receive credit. No partial credit will be granted. CME credit. This workshop has been approved for CME credit. To receive this credit, you need to have signed in at the registration desk and then complete the attestation form and turn it in prior to leaving the conference today. This certifies, the certificates for CME credit will be sent to individuals directly from Des Moines University. Disclosures relevant to the content of this educational activity. All speakers and planning committee members have no conflicts of interest to disclose. You will receive an email with a link to complete an online evaluation after today's conference, just like you did last time. Please take a couple minutes to complete that evaluation and return it. At the end of the evaluation, you'll be able to print a certificate of attendance. Go ahead and keep that form. You can use it for self-reporting continuing education credits. If you are a critical access hospital here, we want to make sure that you sign the flex stipend form. There's a $50 travel stipend available per hospital for attending today's workshop. We would like to send a special thank you to the Iowa Medical Society Foundation. They are sponsoring today's breakfast and lunch, so if you'll help me in thanking them. Very good, so that is it for announcements. So now it's my great pleasure to welcome back Dr. Timothy McDonald. Dr. McDonald is the president for the Center of Open and Honest Communication at the MedStar Institute for Quality and Safety. He's a professor of law at Loyola University in Chicago, and he is a physician attorney whose research has focused on the principled approach to patient harm, with an emphasis on reporting of patient safety events, the use of simulation and human factors analysis, and providing open and honest communication following harm events. His federally funded research has focused on these domains and their impact on improving the quality of care while mitigating medical liability and other legal-related issues. Help me in welcoming back Dr. McDonald.
Okay.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. It is great to be back. This should be a super fun day. You're even going to have that opportunity to interact with the actors again, which, and I think you've agreed, you guys have volunteered that you're going to do all of the enactments today. That's pretty awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So part of the enactments will be, and one of your challenges, and what we hope, the skill transfer we hope that happens today, in addition to the knowledge transfer, is this whole concept around cognitive interviewing. How do you develop rapport? How do you develop trust after a really bad event has happened? So you're going to have a chance to interview a nurse as well as interview a physician and really try to tease out what happened. Because without that, you won't be able to figure out, how is it that this horrible cardiac arrest happened. And then once you learn everything, remember the whole concept around Candor is once you learn what happened, there's then this opportunity to then meet with the family and explain what it is that happened and why. And you're going to get that chance too. So as we continue to try to pull all this together. So just returning again to Candor and the domains where we are. Remember the first workshop we did is actually under number 3 there. We did the communication training along with the care for the caregiver training that was there. And today we're going to focus on the event review and on the reporting piece. In other words, when you have bad stuff happens, how do you activate your organization to be able to respond, to learn from the event, support the caregivers, support the patients and families, and then as we will talk about again today, and then in the third workshop, if it turns out your care was bad, how do you resolve that in a way where you're not making the family fight to get it, but you're actually able to move forward in the context of the legislation, again, that we talked a little bit about last time, that exists here in Iowa. And then the fourth workshop will be, again, taking a case from the very beginning all the way through to the very end, even rewiring things and collecting metrics. But that's where it is. We talked about last time the paradigm shift. Again, the first workshop talked a lot about moving away from that, not speaking at all, to having immediate and ongoing, empathic communication. Also, as we learned a lot in the afternoon at the last workshop, is how do we help those who often suffer in isolation, after these harm events, how do we support them through? But today, again, today's focus is on the event review and that part. The other piece, as you know, we always like to begin making sure we're grounded, we're anchored with patients and families. And to that end, we have a very special guest who's come to share his experiences with his family and that interaction with healthcare. And that's going to be Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Coffey, active in the U.S. Air Force. I'm going to have him come up and share a little bit more about himself and where he is, and it'll be, I think, a pretty powerful conversation that you're gonna be part of now. And so I'll hand it over to you. Here's your slide of answer.
All right. Good morning. See, I'm from the South, so I do a lot of call and response. Good morning. I like this table. I like you guys a lot. So first of all, let me tell you how much I am excited to be here, and it's really a genuine excitement. And I say that because when I was on the plane, as we're flying into Iowa, and this is my first time in Iowa, I said, man, it's so flat. It's so green. I'm from Tennessee originally, so we've got hills and mountains and all kinds of good stuff there. And in D.C., of course, there's not as much green vegetation. So I had one request that I didn't get in time, which was to drive the tractor? What do you call the thing when you pull the combine? Yeah, I want to drive a combine. That's like, life goals. But it is really an honor and a pleasure to be here. And we're doing some very important work in this workshop and in this program as a whole. I'm kind of sad because I'm not here with my wife and my son. And I would like to tell you that I am the absolute bomb.com husband, but sometimes I mess up. It's hard to believe, I mess up. So one time we had a little fight, and she went in the closet, and she says, I'm leaving. So I went in the closet right after and said, okay, where we going? So we were down in New Orleans once, and I saw one of her old boyfriends at the 7-Eleven. He was disheveled, he didn't look good. I looked at her, you glad you married me? She looked back at me and said, baby, if I had married him, he'd be exactly where you are. So I'm sad I'm not here with my wife, but that's how it goes sometimes. I'd look forward to getting back with her. But, what I'm here to do is to give you a bit about me. And I'll start off with you and tell you, we can get to the slides. Oh, did I do that? Green means go. There we go. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. These words of Charles Dickens never rang more true than they did with the birth of my son, Stephen Coffey II. We call him Deuce. I was trying to be, I wanted to call him Junior. That's why I named him Deuce, like Junior. It made sense in my mind. But our lives changed so much when he was born. And so you think, it changed because you don't have sleep anymore. You don't have date night as much as you used to. It's changed. You have a baby. But it changed for a lot of other reasons as well. So, being an Air Force officer, I'm going to try very hard not to make this like an Air Force briefing. So as customary in the Department of Defense, we like to start by telling you what we're going to tell you, then we tell you, and then we wrap up by telling you what we told you. It's just how we do it in the DoD. So here's our flight plan. We're going to start by having a little coffee break since it's early in the morning. I'll tell you more about who I am, more about my family, and how we got on this journey. And then we'll talk about galactosemia, which was the chief reason for Stephen's liver transplant. And so that's like, whoa, wait a minute, you didn't say anything about liver transplant. We'll talk about galactosemia and him having a liver transplant, and then we'll end with some sepsis. So, next slide. Oh. Let's see if it builds out. All right, so my wife and I were married in December of 2011, and had a normal life. It was awesome. We're newlyweds. I really want this to build. Set to go. If it doesn't, then okay. There it is. There we go. That's my wife. Isn't she lovely? So we're newlyweds. We were happily married. And then we found out, as with the military, the only thing that's constant is change. So we found out we were going to be reassigned to Langley Hospital up in Hampton, Virginia. And then we found out we were going to have a bouncing baby boy, someone to carry on the good name. And so we have this baby, he's born, everything is beautiful, we're excited. And then we get some news from a doctor that didn't make a lot of sense. They said, hey, your son's a little jaundiced. Well, that's kind of normal. He's 6 pounds, 1 ounce. Born 37 weeks, 6 days, so not too early. Still a little healthy weight. And they said, hey, he's a little bit jaundiced. Okay, no big deal. Well, he's not latching on very well. Okay, well, I don't know what that means because this is my first kid. And then we find out, they say he's got this thing called galactosemia. I'm like, galacto what? What? And what we then turn into is this little boy had to have a liver transplant at 8 weeks old. Youngest person in the country to have a liver transplant in 2012. So yay, he gets to be first at something already. But the youngest in the country to have a liver transplant at 2012. So you have to start asking yourself, well, how did this happen? And so it's really great that we're looking at Candor, because that's not something that is just readily available in the military medicine. So what I would tell people normally when I'm just talking about my son is that, when you come out in military medicine with 10 fingers, 10 toes, everything's good. We know how to deal with that, but we don't really know how to deal with metabolic conditions and metabolic issues. So we'll talk about galactosemia. And I know for many of you here, you are probably well versed in galactosemia just because you're in the medical field. But for those of you who may have forgotten, you generally fall into 3 categories. Either one, you've heard about it during your medical training and heard about it in the hospital. Category 2, you read about it, but you kind of forgot. In category 3, you were like me and you said galacto what? So this is galactosemia. So we're all familiar with genes and how we come up, how we are made up with our DNA. We have 2 traits. We get them from mom, we get them from dad. They determine our eyes, they determine our hair, they determine our height, and all those kinds of good things. And galactosemia is the same way. So Stephen has the metabolic galactosemia, which is a metabolic condition that his liver cannot break down the GALT1P enzyme. Oh, look at this. Can't break down the GALT1P enzyme, and so his body is missing that, all right? When we think about what genes do, you think about what it really means in terms of how we stretch this thing out. So when I say a gene tells me what I'm going to look like, how tall I'm going to be, I'll say, well, a gene is like a sentence. The sun was hot. Everybody understands that. But then when we have these changes in the genes, these mutations in genes, it changes what that sentence looks like. It changes the flow of that sentence. And the changes happen through deletions. They happen through addition sometimes. They happen when, in Stephen's case, he's got the S135 gene for galactosemia and the S192R with a 14-character deletion in the 192, which is actually what allowed him to stay alive for more than 2 months drinking milk. So when you think about what it really means, so, you know, and I'm always trying to figure out how deep to get into things. So as a non-clinician, I'm somewhat skilled at genetics, which is kind of hard, right? So in his 14-character deletion of his thing, that's allowed him to stay alive for over 2 months drinking milk, his mother's milk and formula. And so to get more into this idea of galactosemia, what normally happens is when you have an active GALT1P enzyme in your body, you're able to have a regular dairy-based diet. Now, when we think about this condition, this metabolic condition, it was only recently that they started to really focus in on this and understand this because we did genetic sequencing, right? So prior to the 1990s, when there was a lot of research done, people thought when your kid died from galactosemia, it was sudden infant death syndrome because the things that present are you're jaundiced, you don't latch on, you don't feed well, you're low birth weight, your glucose is kind of high, your glucose is low rather, your bilirubin is a little bit high, and we put you under the photolysate and you get better. But you're still giving them dairy, you're still giving them milk, and it ends up killing their liver. And the 3 things that happen with galactosemia are normally you have liver failure, cognitive delays, and cataracts. So when I think about my son, who is now 5 years old, talk about a medical miracle from 8 weeks old of having a transplant to now being 5 years old, he gets tested for cataracts every year. He doesn't have dairy. I just left a conference last week in Denver where we talked about galactosemia, and it's a worldwide thing, but it's so unique because of the number of mutations that are there, in a sense that we've got our special little thing with S135 and S192, and there's somebody that's in England that's got a Q188, and another different variation. And so it's hard to pinpoint what galactosemia is and how it actually affects people. So as I was mentioning, when you have galactosemia, you're missing that GALT enzyme, which means that you can't excrete or get rid of the endogenous galactose in your body, and you certainly can't take more in. And it caused him to have a liver transplant, which was huge. So we think about how do we as a family now feel that our baby boy has had this liver transplant, because I had never once talked to the doctors about what happened. All I knew is that when I had my son on November 27th, there was a doctor that came in from a military hospital and said, hey, we've done all we can do for his bilirubin. Put him back under the lights. What are you doing? We're going to send you to a larger hospital. And we go to Georgetown. And then I'm sitting in the room in Georgetown on November 28th, and I have this medical resident that comes in, and they say, this is Stephen, our 2-month-old from an outside hospital who has fulminant liver failure secondary to galactosemia. Again, I didn't know what galactosemia was. The only time I'd heard of it previously was there was one doctor who called us on the phone and said, hey, your son's got galactosemia. And so I want to bring this up because it's a very important part about how I understood. And this is one thing that we have to, that professionals have to ensure that we speak so that we're not misunderstood, as opposed to always trying to speak so that we're understood. This lady, she's a brand new doctor to military medicine, and she's from Ghana. So there's a little bit of a language difference. I have her on speakerphone because I want my wife to hear the same thing. And she says, your son has galactosemia, and I don't even know what galactosemia is. I can't spell it. I can't Google it fast enough as she's talking. And we drive off to the hospital, and what I find out is that she did not make a phone call to tell the receiving hospital, you're going to get these patients in that they have this condition called galactosemia. I know it's a military hospital, and you guys aren't very familiar with this and aware of it, but this is something that I've dealt with as a civilian provider who's now in the military system. I didn't know those things. And then when this doctor tells us on the next day, the 27th of November, hey, we've done all we can do for bilirubin, I'm thinking again, put him under the lights. Let him cook a little longer. And then we get there and we find out he's now going to have a liver transplant. So I'm still waiting 5 years later for someone in the military to come back to me and say, hey, Colonel Coffey, this is what happened. This is where we messed up. And that's an important thing that I want to really relay to you, that sometimes Get out of your own head of thinking that you can't tell me the bad news. I'm a big boy. I promise I am. I can take it, and I want to know. And that's something that, I'm sitting on another board as well with someone to improve. It's the Society to Improve the Diagnosis in Medicine. And that's really exciting work that we're doing there because we're doing some root cause analysis of how did we get here? And I know this is way kind of off topic, but it's important because one of the things that I think about is we talk about training. And we're in the military, we're very big on training. We're very big on training. We do computer-based training all the time. We go out for exercises all the time. We do all of this training, and I think about that one kid who was the two-stripe airman who's been in the military all of probably 4 months, had 39 days of training to do the medical assessment for my family. Put that in your mind. You just got out of high school. You get 39 weeks of training in the medical field, and you're the first point of contact that everybody's going to come in with the wide range of issues, the wide range of challenges and questions. And I will tell you one thing that I've now made this kind of like my buzzword here. When I go to the hospital, it is a significant emotional event. When you go to the hospital, you're going to work. You love your job. You do your job well. When I go to the Pentagon, I don't even recognize the stuff that's on the walls. It is totally oblivious to me. I walk my little pace, and everybody in D.C. walks really fast. I'm like walking my little pace, my head down, don't talk to me, just let me get to my office. I don't realize the people that are taking tours because this is my job. When I bring my family, or if any of you ever come to D.C. and want a tour, let me know. I guarantee you'll say, man, this is a cool place to work. You have like how many Starbucks in this building? Really, we have 2 full Starbucks and like 1 on every floor. It's crazy. And Dunkin' Donuts too, so we get you covered. Coke or Pepsi, we got it all right? So I totally don't even look at those things. Totally don't look at those things. But it's a significant emotional event when I come to the hospital. Every single time, and I've been going to Georgetown for 5 years now. It's still a significant emotional event. So I want you to, if there's nothing else you take from this whole entire talk, is a significant emotional event when patients come to the hospital. So that's my son. He had a transplant. I still don't know why or where the military fell off. I can point back and say maybe if we'd given that little guy more than 39 weeks of training, maybe that would have helped. Maybe if that doctor had called ahead of us getting to that larger hospital to say, hey, there's a family coming in with galactosemia, that would have helped. Maybe if the way we did testing for galactosemia, because it's in the military we call something called centralized control with decentralized execution. So centralized control says that we're mandated to have newborn screening. Decentralized execution says that Virginia does it differently than Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, there's one doctor, Gerald Berry, who's like the world's authority for galactosemia, and he says if you look like, smell like, test like, show like you have galactosemia, stop dairy immediately and go to soy until we can figure this out. In Virginia, it's 3 tests have to come back positive. We didn't make it to a 3rd test. So those are the kinds of things that I think about when I'm figuring out how to improve medicine. Those are the kinds of questions I have in my head when I'm thinking about, hey, military guys, why couldn't you tell me what happened to my son? So I think there's a video we want to show of little Steven. And it's not the AV guys' problem. I came in and changed some slides early this morning, so the order part, that's me. It's not those guys. They did it right. So we'll see if we can play the video for him. Team Deuce. So really cool. That's my boy. Makes Dad proud. Thank you. Thank you. And so it's 2 years post-transplant when I did that video. And I'll tell you, I never really understood the impact of the video until much later. So while we're in the hospital, you think about how do you cope with something that is so traumatic. And people ask me all the time, how did you and your wife do that? How did you go through being in the hospital the first time, 42 days in the ICU? I didn't even know that the ICU, the PICU, was like where we send the sickest kids. Significant emotional event, right? How'd you guys do that? And what I started doing was taking videos, and we had a blog called Caring Bridge, and we would update Caring Bridge every single day. And so when I look back, I have a journal of his first year of life every single day on Caring Bridge. And then I found out, I'm not that great at graphics. That's iMovies, so it makes me look like I'm, Steven Spielberg. But I did that video, and it was like, hey, let me just do his transplant anniversary. Let me do his birthday. So there's a couple of the videos out there. And now that I look back, and I really think, sometimes sit and pause, because, I'll tell you as a military guy, I always want to look forward. I'm moving. But every now and again, it's important to just take a moment to pause and reflect back. I get a little emotional because I think about how far he's come when I see those pictures of the tubes and the stitches and the stuff. And I'm like, man, this little boy is running around and he's jumping and he's doing all those things that normal 5-year-old kids are doing. It kind of makes me say, wow, that's pretty cool. It's pretty amazing. But last thing, and this is a shameless plug, okay? Shameless plug, because we're all family now, right? It's like, I feel comfortable to go drive a tractor out here, so we're all family. So every Saturday morning, we do this thing called coffee breaks, and of course, coffee breaks, right? On Facebook. And we've got about 1,400 people, go figure, 1,400 people that look at these videos of this little boy on Facebook. Called Coffee Breaks. And so certainly invite you guys to come look at those things too. You will see the world through the eyes of a 5-year-old, which is absolutely hilarious with some of the things that he thinks up and does. So I definitely invite you to that. But the last thing I will leave with you before I take my seat is thank you for the work that you do. It is tremendously important. The patients that you engage with, the families you engage with, the work you do for your hospital system, it is tremendously important. Without your professionalism, without the work you do, my son would not be here. And so for people that may not say it, you are unsung heroes. For the people that may not say it, I want to personally, heartfeltly say thank you, thank you, thank you. So look forward for the rest of the day.
That was awesome. And there's another video that we're going to show right at the end of the break that Stephen is part of. It's the PFAC that kind of produced it, right? With you and Armando. It's a really, really powerful video about sepsis. And a story of when one patient did not get the kind of treatment needed to, and you'll be able to share a little bit about what happened with Deuce. And it's a great video, and a lot of PFACs have picked it up because they're now using it in the community to help with issues around sepsis. So we'll play that right at the end of the break. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Kelly Baker, who is also from the MedStar Institute for Quality and Safety. She's actually the program director for the patient safety research projects, which is really amazing to be able to work with her on that. We've got a lot of research going into, things like, we've talked about here. She's also a human factors scientist. And so for the next interactive part here, she's going to talk a lot about how root cause analysis have evolved, completely in the last few years. So she's going to share some of that stuff with you. And then after we get into some of that, we are going to start beginning the case and really start peeling the onion back on the case that you guys got the information on. We'll introduce it again and go through that. But Kelly, if I could have you come up now and then share your wisdom as it relates to event review. And again, there's your slide advancer.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. A little bit of a tough act to follow. I don't have a video of an adorable child to start with, but I'm thinking that if that video doesn't motivate you to want to learn about how to do better event reviews and learn more from them and improve your systems, I don't know what would. I also will say, this is my first time in Iowa too, so happy to be here for that, but I was born in Oklahoma City, so I know flat already. I come from DC today. I live in DC now, in the DC area, so I made the same trip that Stephen made, but I do know flat already. Okay, so traditional root cause analysis. An event happens, everyone checks their schedule. You figure out we can probably get everybody into a room 2, 3, 4 weeks from now. Everyone involved sits around a table and discusses the event. Everyone from a leader to the frontline nurse, everyone in the same room. You determine the root cause, assign someone to address it, and then 6 weeks later, you fill out your reports, you send them in. It's a long, drawn-out process. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like what you guys do for event review? So in the last, I don't know how many years, 5 or so years, people have started to sort of turn that on its head. We have a next generation event review. The National Patient Safety Foundation calls it RCA squared for root cause analysis and action. ARC has their Candor program where they call it an event review as opposed to root cause analysis. And it's very different. You conduct it immediately. You're in action the moment you find out that an event has occurred. You use a systems approach rather than looking at individuals and looking for someone to blame and whose fault was this. The focus is on learning. The focus is on preventing this event from happening to anyone else in the future. You include the patient and the family. You seek any factor that could have contributed because that's an opportunity to improve the system. You're not looking for the root cause. You're looking for any factor that could have contributed. And that'll help you design more sustainable solutions. And then you follow up. You confirm that, that people are complying with the solution and that it's effective. And if it's not, you regroup and you do another solution. So can we talk a little bit about what you're currently doing? What does your root cause analysis procedure look like? What role do you have in it? We can either talk at your small table and then report out, or there's few of us enough in here, if we just want to talk about how do you do root cause analysis? Sure. We need to catch our box.
Where's that blue box? I want to use that. That's way cool. I feel very powerful now. We are a Joint Commission accredited hospital, so we tend to use that template that the Joint Commission has traditionally put out there as, the tool to use. And it just basically walks through, though, the process that you were just describing as in the old way of doing things.
Right.
And our biggest struggle always is the immediacy of setting the people down around the table. And amazingly, sometimes the barriers are getting the department director, wherever the event occurred, to accommodate getting that staff people or those staff personnel who were involved, freeing them up from their schedule to get them to the table. Oh, they work nights only. Let's not bother them while they're sleeping. It's logistics.
Yeah.
It is.
And that's why it can take weeks to get all the right people in especially when you're trying to get everyone into one room.
Yeah, there you go. So, because you were shaking your head this way, that you don't do it the old way. I'm going to do that. I just wanted to make sure it's okay because I don't want to throw anything in anybody without their informed consent. All right, now here's the risk, here's the benefit, and now you can ask questions.
Right, awesome, I caught it. How embarrassing would it be to be 2 feet away and not catch it, right?
That was the other thing I was trying to do.
So what we do probably a little different approach. So we kind of serve as a network, and we pull in our network resources. So we tap into each other, so we support each other through it. We try to do it immediately, but immediately is really almost next day. If we can come together on the day of, we do.
But even next day is better than weeks.
Mhm. And we
Sure.
totally free up the staff schedules. We'll stop surgery. So we'll actually cancel surgical procedures if it was a surgical incident, just to pull the team together. So we do whatever has to be done to start right away. It takes us a while to finish it because those contributing factors can take you on such a different route.
Yes.
That we can't always get to those right away.
Yes.
But we try and identify them as quickly as possible and then work together with
That's
our
great.
teams.
So you've started down this path that we want to take you.
And I'm part of her network, and we are proud to have each other and very blessed. One of the things, if we can't get to the root cause analysis that day or the next day, regardless of that, when we can get to it, we always do a debriefing at the end of, whenever it's most convenient. If it's at the end of the day or in the next hour or whatever, we will sit around. Yeah, swarming or do a debriefing with the whole team around in the room if we can do that. And then I was going to say one other thing, but I forgot what it was.
Let me ask a question, because I know we talked about the Candor law the last time, but are there any regulatory expectations for you all in terms of when you have a serious safety event and when it needs to be finished and a report in or all that? Because a lot of states have that, where you have to do the review, you have to submit all that. Do you have any?
One I can think of is if it's a death related to a fall. The DIA has some regulations around that.
How quick you need to do
Yeah,
it and when to get them?
but with the exception of that, that's the only regulatory thing I can think of.
Well, then take the box.
Yeah, I remembered what it was. One thing that I'm looking forward to learning today is that missing piece. We're not well versed or maybe even that comfortable with bringing the family in. So listening to what Mr. Coffey said, I think we really could gain some insight on that.
The other piece is we're critical access hospitals, and so if it's a significant issue and we've created harm, we've probably already transferred the patient out also. And so how to pull in the next site, the communication piece, but then also the patient and be aware of what the next site is already communicating with the patient so that we're on the same page.
Well, and that's our case, we're going to go through today, because that patient who suffered that event got airlifted, kind of like it would be in your case, to another place. How about over in this part of the room? People's experiences are, oh, you've got your own box over there. God, I'm going to move this back this
two
way.
boxes.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay.
So we actually, in the past, probably did it more in the traditional way, but we've had some changeover, and now I have a new director and manager and care coordination, quality and risk. So that's why we're here to learn about some new ideas and how
Okay.
we can do it better.
Okay. Thanks for sharing all that. And I'm interested, I've not heard the word swarm before, the term swarm. Is that what it sounds like? Okay.
Process excellence where you swarm,
Yep, yep, yep. Okay, so human error. Don Norman is a computer science researcher. He's a cognitive scientist, a usability expert. And he basically said, people make mistakes. Accidents can happen from the mistakes. But the problem is seldom the fault of the person. And if you try to change the person without changing the system, you're not going to eliminate the mistake. Someone else is going to make the same mistake. So if we spend our time trying to eliminate error, we're not going to get safer, eliminate human error. What we need to do is make the system safer and more reliable. And the other thing is, if we allow frontline staff to believe that we think human error can be eliminated, then we create a culture of blame and secrecy because they feel like they should not have made the error. If error can be eliminated, then I shouldn't have made an error, or my colleague shouldn't have made an error. So we need to not try to eliminate human error, but instead adopt a systems approach. And you need to be asking what is responsible for an event, not who is responsible for an event. If you worry about who is responsible, it diverts attention from getting to the system problems. It results in solutions like retraining, like discipline, that aren't sustainable solutions, that don't make us safer. And so you need to not stop at human error as a cause. You need to keep looking, and you need to integrate human factors in that. And I'll talk a little bit more about human factors in a second. I've got a little Human Factors 101 for you I want to give later. So when you take a systems approach, that can help you establish a just culture. And in a just culture, you're looking at, you want to understand a person's intentions and the context that the event happened in or their behavior happened in so that you can classify their behavior. And behavior is either normal error, at-risk behavior, or reckless behavior. And normal error is the stuff that happens to all of us all the time. It's a slip, a lapse, a mistake. It's everyday error, and as I said, you can't eliminate it. At-risk behavior occurs when people aren't well trained necessarily in what they're doing. They don't appreciate the value in following a procedure, and so they're working sort of at risk. And reckless behavior is deliberate, conscious violation of procedure or policy. And so in a just culture, knowing when you classify the behavior, that tells you how to react to the behavior, and that tells you what your response should be. For normal error, your response should be support. If someone has made a normal error, they feel bad about it, and they should be supported, and you should be looking to design system solutions to address it. If someone displays at-risk behavior, you need to coach them. They need to understand why their behavior is at risk, and you could also look for opportunities to design system solutions. And then reckless behavior just is unacceptable and not tolerated. Okay, so human factors. I just want to divert a little bit and talk to you about some human factors principles just to get you thinking, so you can start when you approach an event and you're doing an event review, you can be thinking sort of the way a human factors scientist might think. So first of all, how many of you have heard the term human factors and know what it is? A little bit, not many. So I've been doing it for 10 years now, and my dad still thinks I'm in human resources. And he can't understand why I would go from engineering to human resources, and I've tried to explain it, but... So human factors is, I almost said human resources. Human factors is, it's applying what we know about humans, their cognitive abilities, their physical abilities, their limitations, to the design of something, a system, a device, a process, a procedure, to make the use of that thing better, safer, more efficient, more comfortable. In a nutshell, to me, human factors is making it easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing. It's interesting, the more I've gotten into human factors now at my house, human factors is blamed for everything. So there was a time that my husband deleted everything off our DVR. I don't know what he was trying to do. He was trying to maybe delete one thing. But he came to me and said, it should not have been that easy for me to do this. It should have warned me. I didn't even know what I did. And suddenly everything was, but it was the design of the system that was at fault. Okay, so some human factors concepts. One is affordance. Affordance means the design affords you what you should do with it. You see a bench, you think sit. This door does not afford you what you should do with it. You see that door with those handles you want to pull, but in fact you have to push, which is why they've had to label it push. Okay, cognitive load. Cognitive load theory basically says there's only so much our brains can do at one time. So you're driving down the road, so you're already doing one thing, right? You're driving, you're looking for a place to park. It's Sunday morning. Can you park here? How long would it take you to figure that out? Whereas something like this, still complicated because this is a complicated place to park, but at least if it's Sunday, I can figure out pretty quickly if I can park there or not. So just designed to ease the cognitive load. Post-completion error. Post-completion error happens when, and we're all susceptible to this, we've accomplished our goal, and so we're done. So how many times have you written the email and hit send because you got your thoughts out, you've written the email, you've hit send, and you didn't attach the attachment? Another example is ATM machines. ATM machines were actually redesigned, most of them, to address post-completion error, because it used to be that they would give you your money before they gave you your card back. So people would take their money and walk away. Now, the machines are the last thing, you get your money, you get your card. The last thing you get is your money, because that's your goal, was to get money. Okay, work as imagined versus work as done. So there's very often a gap between the work that, and this is very true in healthcare, the work that designers or leaders think is being done versus what is actually being done. And this is a simple example where someone designed a path around the tree, but what actually happens is people are just cutting right through. I participated in one event review where the hospital had instituted an electronic system, a communication system, that was supposed to help the ED communicate with radiology. And the primary purpose was to help identify discrepancies between the preliminary reads that happened in the ED and the overreads when the radiologist got to it. But this system was a piggyback system onto the radiology system. And so the ED docs had to enter something twice. They had to enter it in their EHR, then they had to enter it in this system. So none of them did it. And so the leadership thinks, we have a system so that these things won't happen. We have a system in place, so we're not going to miss discrepancies. But the way I know about this is that we had a discrepancy, and we missed it, and a patient was harmed because it was not being used. Work as imagined was very different from work as done. Let's see. Okay, recognition versus recall. So this principle is that whenever you can, don't make people remember what they have to do. Make it obvious what they have to do. These three pictures are the boundary between zone 2 and zone 3 in an MRI suite. So here in this first one, you can see very clearly marked. It's clear that you are going from one zone to another. I would argue maybe too much signage, but that's a different human factors problem. This is also a boundary from zone 2 to zone 3, door with one sign on it. So maybe not, a little bit more recall required there. This last one, if I can scoot over, this is the boundary. It changes from right at this corner, changes from zone 2 to zone 3. So people have to remember, you have to recall, I'm going from zone 2 to zone 3 there. Let me also point out on this middle, this is also an example of work as imagined versus work as done, because one tech staffs that suite, so he always leaves the door open. So you don't really have a door boundary even though that's the intent. The door is supposed to be the boundary, but if it's always open, it's as if there's no door. Okay. Forcing functions. Forcing functions make you take a conscious step or a pause before you can proceed to the next step. It forces you to be more conscious of what you're doing. So these are two examples of a Pyxis drawer. The first one, open cubbies. If you're stocking it, if you're grabbing something, if you're putting something back, you just put it in, but there's a distinct possibility that something ends up in the wrong cubby. You're in a hurry, you've never stocked this one before, all kinds of things. The newer Pyxis drawers force you to lift the little lid. Just slows you down, lift the lid. Yes, I want to go in here to drop this in. So forcing functions can help too. Okay, so that's a little Human Factors 101, just things to think about, concepts to think about, because very often, sorry.
No, I was going to say, so how many of you have worked with or connected to operating rooms? So what are some forcing functions that are there that evolved because of some huge catastrophes that happened, many years ago, particularly in anesthesia? What are some forcing functions you can think of in the operating room? Well, so timeout is one of the ways to do, but I'm thinking more about on the engineering side. And so kind of what I'm getting at is that it used to be possible to connect nitrous oxide to the oxygen input. And you had to remember, green is oxygen and blue is nitrous oxide, and when I hook it up, that's how I have to do it. And so it was not uncommon, and we weren't using pulse oximeters, okay? So it might be very late in the case when you look down and realize, oh my God, we just delivered pure nitrous oxide. So there's forcing functions now that you cannot physically connect a nitrous oxide tank to the oxygen input. And vice versa. You cannot put the oxygen tank and connect it into where the nitrous oxide go. So these are some of the things, as Kelly mentioned, think about in your organization, or what can you do where you don't have to remember that part of it, but actually do, forcing functions from that standpoint. How about in practical life? What are some things that happen? There's a really cool article written by a medical student who once, and the one I'm thinking of is, accidentally filled her tank up with diesel. Because you could. Until they really started looking at how do you redesign that? How do you make it in such a way where you can't do that? Well, here's the box.
Oh, I got the box.
Here's the box. There you go. So I'm sure you guys must have a bunch of those.
So I'll tell you what's really interesting. Everyone remembers September 11th, 2001, right? September the 10th, 2001. If you were to go into the Pentagon, you would see a whole different place, totally different place. So we talk about those normal things. Catastrophic events cause us to change, and the change becomes like, oh my gosh, why didn't we think of this at first? In the Pentagon, there's these little, you've been on airplanes before and you see the illuminated strips. They're all around the Pentagon, on the bottom of the floors, those strips are there, with arrows pointing to the exit. So the reason why a lot of people died in the building was not because of the impact of the plane. So interestingly enough, when the plane hit the building, most of that part of the building was empty because we were renovating the Pentagon at that time. People died because of smoke inhalation, because they didn't know how to get out of the building because we didn't know where the door was. So they now have these illuminated strips on the base of the floor and the wall that tell you how to get out. Oh my gosh, why didn't we think of that before? Cell phones. There's some things we can do, really cool things we can do with cell phones. And the Secretary of Defense just said, hey, all cell phones go outside of your door now because of the really cool things we can do with cell phones that other people can probably do as well. Why didn't we think of that before? Catastrophic events that cause us to readjust our thinking, readjust the paradigm by which we operate from, and actually makes us have better outcomes.
Well, I can think of another personal catastrophic event, and I don't know how many of this. Have any of you ever, particularly in the past, locked your keys in the car? Did you ever lock the keys in the car with the engine running? Isn't that scary to think about doing that? I can't do that now. I mean, I'm with my Acura, I'm not able to do that. You know, it is an amazing thing that again they redesigned it, and again that thing is sort of like a catastrophe. So it is interesting to think of every day. That's why I like Norman's book. You know, there's so many examples he puts in that book of the design of everyday things or something like that. Is just fantastic because boy, in healthcare, it's the same thing as well. Every place you walk around, there's that.
One of the things when you said that, in the olden days, and that wasn't too many years ago, with the electric windows, you pushed it down and it raised the window up and it was choking kids.
Yes.
So now it's the other direction so that the kids can't get choked, or your pets too.
Yep. Yeah, totally agree. Lots of that. Anyway, Kelly, I'm sorry, I digress. You say these things, it just prompts me to think of crazy
Well, and
stuff.
once you start thinking like a human factors person, you see it everywhere. You see either redesigns that are as a result of human factors or things that should be redesigned, like a human factors person should be looking at this. And Stephen sort of alluded to another thing that made me think, sort of one of the little secrets about human factors to me, you know, I have a master's degree in it, I'm trained in it, it's common sense. You don't need a degree in human factors. It's common sense stuff. If you really just think about how people use things, anyway, I think it's fascinating. And so I hope I piqued your interest a little bit with some of those examples. Okay, let's talk about the event review process. Across the top are the sequential steps you would make. And I mentioned earlier, NPSF has their RCA squared tool, Candor, ARC has a Candor toolkit. The concepts are very similar. The terminology I'm using here is mostly from the Candor toolkit because it's what I'm more familiar with, but RCA squared, if you were to use that, would be similar also. So the steps across the top happen sequentially. You have an immediate response, then you do an in-depth event review, then you come together to come to consensus about what the contributing factors were. And once you've agreed on the contributing factors, then you can identify solutions, and then you implement your solutions and follow up. So those are happening sequentially, but the items in immediate response can be happening all at the same time. So first is the concept of triage. So you want to avoid blameworthy events, though those are rare. That's the reckless behavior, intentional acts. That's very rare. And you might have to do a bit of a review to figure out that it was an intentional act. And then you'll, ideally, you would be reviewing not only every event, but every near miss and every potential accident. But the reality is we have limited resources, we have to prioritize. So you want to prioritize events with higher severity and higher likelihood of occurring. And just let me say, when you prioritize the severity, look at not only the severity, the actual severity, but the potential severity. So if you had a patient accidentally bring an oxygen canister into an MRI and it gets sucked into the magnet. Fortunately, the patient's not hurt, the tech's not hurt, the MRI sustains a little bit of damage. It was a small canister. So your actual severity is moderate, but the potential severity is catastrophic. So this is still, a high, this would rank high on your list, on your priority list. Okay, the other things you're doing in the immediate term, you're informing your system leadership. And you want to think through in advance how that's going to work. Who needs to be notified? How do they want to be notified? Are you going to send emails? Are you going to text them? Are you going to call them? At MedStar, we have a Go team at each hospital, and then we have a system-level Go team. And the individual hospital Go team, of course, responds first, and they have people they notify, and then they make the decision, does this rise to the level of, do we need to engage the system level, the local Go team decides, do we need to engage the system level Go team? And it's all decided in advance, who gets notified, how they get notified. Obviously, you care for the patient and the family. You bring resources, whatever resources you need to care for the patient and the family. You care for the caregiver. And I know you've heard a lot of these things in your previous workshop, and we'll continue to hear from Tim. Gather time-sensitive information. Maybe you have strips, or maybe the event had to do with a device. If you can sequester that device, that's a good thing to do in the immediate term. And then you identify your core team. So let's do another. So who do you think would go on your core team, just in general? Anybody? Who would you put on your core team?
And this is event review core team, right?
Event review core team.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think the
Oh, hey, let me throw the box at you.
So this is not who. This is who's going to review the event.
Oh, who's going to review?
Who's gonna review the
It would
event?
be risk and leadership
Risk,
and safety probably, and I mean, it depends on the nature of what it was, but.
Anybody else?
Those who are involved in the event at the beginning, like at least one representative of somebody there to help say, do we have this information accurate? Not everyone, but at least somebody.
So you're going to be interviewing the people who are involved in the event for sure. Whether you put them on the team to review, I guess could depend on the circumstance, yeah. So you might want a subject matter expert. You might want somebody who's trained in what happened but wasn't involved, doesn't know anything about the event. You might want somebody who understands the event review process. You would want someone who understands the event review process. So all of you are going to be key candidates to be on the core team. Frontline staff who aren't involved. And then think about a patient representative. Maybe you have a PFAX, and maybe someone on your PFAX can also participate on your event review team. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll tell you one of the good things about that patient representative and why that's important. So at Georgetown, we've got a patient representative that goes to some of the significant harm events. And so, of course, the way they declassify it. So pardon me for when I jump back into military vernacular, because that's what I'm very comfortable with, and I'm trying to break out of that, right? So we declassify it so there's no names and all that kind of stuff, but it gives that perspective. And what I've found from listening to that member that sits in those events is that PFAC member gives a perspective that the clinicians oftentimes forget about. So you're looking at something that seems so routine, and why would we do that? And that PFAC member comes in and says, hey, you know what? I remember this, and you're telling me that, but why didn't you look at it from this perspective? Right? So, and I know there's a whole bunch of thises and that's, but it's amazing how words kind of have meaning, and you kind of understand what that this and that is. That PFAC member will give you a this and a that. That'll help you see things from a light that's really important, because again, the more you can involve patients, the better your outcomes are going to be. Because again, my big thing is medicine is a people business. Oh my gosh, that's kind of one of those human factor things. It's a people business. We're here to take care of people, but oftentimes other things get in our way and kind of cloud our visions and thoughts about doing it. It's a people business. Involve the patients.
Watch this.
And I got it. I'm curious, raise your hand. When you see listed up there, include a patient representative on your event review, who gets nervous about doing that? Yeah, up goes the hand. So I think it's a really good opportunity for us to have a group conversation today, maybe about that opportunity.
So great question. So what do you? There you go. So what are you nervous about?
You know, and I'm going to just really be very transparent here. I'm not so nervous necessarily about me or the hospital staff per se. I get most nervous about the physician reaction to our suggestion to include a patient. Because I think from my small little hospital standpoint, I feel like we internally are much more comfortable with engaging the patients. but we often hesitate because of, oh, the doctor won't like that. Oh, the doctor doesn't want them to know that. Oh my God, the doctor's gonna freak out. So my apologies to any physicians in the room, but
You don't need to apologize. I don't mind. No, seriously.
Yeah.
No, but
It's
so I
protection
want-
of the
I want
physician.
to be clear about what Stephen and Kate said is they're not talking about having the patient harmed in the meeting. They're just talking about a patient because in some ways they're a content expert. They've been in the bed.
yeah,
They've been in your bed.
yeah.
So I'm very curious.
The important distinction there, I mean,
Well,
yeah.
and I think that's,
Right.
I think a lot of physicians don't realize that. Sometimes when they hear this, go, oh my God, I don't want the patient there to hear us, watch us make the sausage. Related to their case.
Well, I didn't realize that you were referring to the patient not harmed.
That's why.
Sorry,
That's why I think Kate brought it up. I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure, that we were.
Who we were talking about, right.
Are people nervous if it's just a PFAC? Like, imagine having Stephen in one of those meetings.
Oh, yeah.
That would be unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, given his military background and what he understands about aviation and all that sort of stuff, it could be, I would think the docs would welcome it. If you framed it right, you shared it right. No, seriously. No, you picked the right person. Seriously.
And so one of the things that is really important is the paradigm that we use to frame mistakes and mishaps in the military and in aviation and how it is in medicine. So you think about the number of planes that fly, and I'd read a stat from maybe 2014 or so that there was about 3 to 5 billion with a B, billion flights that happen per year. And if I remember correctly, the stat of the number of planes that fell out of the sky in 2014 was pretty low. It's around the 1 or 2%. And if you added that Malaysia flight that had 200 some odd people that died, that made it bump up just a little bit. But think about that in terms of medical error. How many times do we have medical error, medical harm, patients that have unintended outcomes of care, the phrases that we use? When the military has, God bless you, when the military has planes that fall out of the sky, that's a learning opportunity for us. Let that sink in. You don't hear about too many military planes that fall out of the sky for errors. We've had a couple recently, and we're digging into those things, and we're getting after that problem. But we look at those things as learning opportunities. Not chastising, not trying to crucify the pilot or the guy that did it, but a learning opportunity. How is it looked at in medicine? Because you say, hey, we got to protect the doctor, or the doctor's ego. So since I'm the non-clinician here, I can be real transparent as like, I'm the patient rep. You may not invite me back next time, but I got to protect the doctor's ego. We don't look at it that way. It's a team concept in the military. There's no I in team.
And the other statistic that goes with that I can't remember the exact number, but it's in the hundreds. There's a study out fairly recently that in aviation, a pilot makes on the order of 100 plus. Have you heard this too? I wish I had the number.
It's like an error every 2 or 3 minutes.
Yes, they're making mistakes.
They make a mistake every
all day
2 or 3
long,
minutes.
But the system is designed
To catch him. Yep.
to catch it and to mitigate it.
Yep. Ready? Oh, no, it's at your table.
Oh.
What's the process look like for choosing a patient representative? I'm just thinking of our community is so small, and to get that perspective from the patient I think is great, but what's the process like of choosing that representative
So
that's
there
best
is
fit for
there's
that?
actually a evidence-based best practice for doing that. Marty Hatley, who I know you guys all know really super well, he is he's probably one of the most prominent kind of patient advocates out there. He works a lot with CMS and with the Partnership for Patients. He and Armando Nahum have developed, again, an evidence-based best practice of how do you identify people, not just to be the reps on the review group, but also your PFAC. And it's tried and true, it's worked really well, and there's a whole interview process because you don't want people who are single issue, have an axe to grind, who get in there and say this stuff all the time, because that will turn off the docs and the other people doing that. So there's Kate, I'm happy we can share that stuff. I think Marty is going to make either the resolution or putting it all together. We will bring all that stuff. We can give it as materials. You guys can see it, and we'll even talk through it. So, and he's right now doing a lot of work with CMS going out to hospitals that have done this and collecting data to really refine it and again, be able to share it with all of you who are part of it. Really great question, though. Is that helpful? Okay.
Okay, I will proceed. Okay, now let's talk about the in-depth event review and what you actually do. And I'm going to say everything is important. You're going to do a lot of reviewing and observing, but it's the interviews and the talking to people that really make the difference. You're trying to prevent this from happening again. That's your number one goal. You're trying to prevent this from happening again. Something made someone think. Someone came to work that day intending to do their best work. Something made someone think something was the right thing to do at the time, and you need to understand what made them think that. So you're going to interview people, and they're going to be upset. They're going to be worried. They've been through an emotional, traumatic event. So it's very important that you make them feel safe. It's very important that, that they trust you. It's important that they know this is a learning experience for you. You are fact-finding, not fault-finding. I had an example here I want to share. Oh, okay. So oops. Now I want to go back. Does this take me back? There we go. Confidentiality is important. They're not getting in trouble. What they tell you won't be shared. The example I wanted to share, and I apologize if I refer to my notes frequently. I jammed this full of examples, and then I want to make sure I remember them all. So part of the confidentiality is someone should not be interviewed with their supervisor in the room. And I sat on one event review where we were doing it sort of the old-fashioned way, and we had a room full of people, and we were talking about a workaround. I don't remember exactly the workaround, but we were talking about a workaround that a nurse had presumably done. And I asked a nurse who was not involved in the event, but just asked, have you ever done this? And before she could open her mouth, her supervisor said, no, we don't do that. And then she turned to the 3 nurses in the room and said, you don't do that, right? And then what do you think they all said? No, we don't do that. So confidentiality is important. Keep your focus on learning. Make sure you're showing empathy, not judgment. There have been times when, in my head, I've thought, why in the world would you do that? But I have to reserve that. I have to assume I don't understand yet. I haven't gotten yet to what made them think they should do that. So if I'm still thinking that, I haven't dug deep enough yet. So some logistics for doing your interviews. 1 interviewer, maybe 2, but 1 interviewer. You don't want the person to feel overwhelmed. Tell them how long to expect, because someone coming in to be interviewed by you is going to be nervous. Tell them 30 to 60 minutes is what it typically is. Arrange a convenient, quiet location that's private so you can do the interview. Arrange it through the supervisor, but coach the supervisor so that the message to the person that the supervisor gives is that this is about learning, this is not about blaming. Get clinical coverage. So they're not, you certainly couldn't conduct an interview for an event review while a person was still covering their shifts or had clinical responsibilities. I have been able occasionally to ask a nurse who is on shift, do you have a minute for a couple of questions? This wasn't a nurse involved in the event. It was just a nurse who would be familiar with a process, so you can get a few minutes of someone's time. Excuse me just a second. But you really need to get clinical coverage for them. Take notes. Tell the interviewer, I'm taking notes so that I remember things and so I get everything right. I had one interview with a nurse who was very transparent. It was an interview about a device, and she was very critical of the device. She was actually bypassing some safeguards on the device, but she had, in her mind, very good reasons for doing so, and it was important that I understand her reasons for doing so, because that's how we'd get to improvements. But after she sort of said all this, and I'm taking notes, she got very nervous. She got very nervous about my notes. I let her read them. I let her, and she was reassured to see I hadn't written her name down and that I had captured her concerns. It wasn't about, my notes weren't about she's bypassing safeguards. My notes were about, these are the circumstances that would lead someone to bypass the safeguards. These are the circumstances we need to address. So I just shared my notes with her. The introduction is very important. That's your initial impression. That's your initial setting the person at ease. Introduce yourself and your role. And again, back to the emphasis on we're trying to learn. We just want to understand what happened. Ask open-ended questions. Not, did this happen? Did that happen? But what happened? You want them to offer you the information, and you don't want to lead them in any direction. Wait to speak. Allow silence. Be comfortable with silence. Allow emotion. It's very common for people to cry in an interview. And how you react to their emotion is very important. You need to be very careful to react empathetically so they're not ashamed of anything. Be very careful not to show judgment. Don't interrupt them. Be aware of your body language. Be aware of their body language. So if they're showing signs of anxiety, be aware of that and react to that accordingly. Okay, technique. Let's talk about some techniques for interviewing. Very important is just genuine curiosity. Like I said before, I always assume that I just don't understand what happened, and I need them to fill me in so that I can get an understanding. I'm just really curious about what happened. Cognitive interviewing, which Tim is going to both talk about later and do some exercise with you later, but cognitive interviewing has its roots in crime investigation and eyewitness interviewing, and it's based on memory retrieval strategies and tools. One is to have the interviewee go back to the setting, have them try to remember everything about where they were so they can just picture themselves there again, everything from what they heard to what they smelled even, to try to bring them back to the scene of the crime, in the case of crime, obviously, but to the event. Another one is to have them tell you every little detail, even if it seems irrelevant. The more they talk about all the details, the more they can get back at what happened, and it can help them remember what happened. Another is, oh, right on the microphone. I'm so sorry. Another is have them pick the story up at different points. Sometimes that jars a memory rather than having them tell the story. You'll want it start to finish, but then you might also question them from the middle of the story and have them go on. And then the fourth is to have them tell it from another perspective. What do you think the nurse saw? So that's cognitive interviewing, which, as I said, Tim's going to, I think he has a lot of fun stuff planned for us for cognitive interviewing. I find the cognitive interviewing especially fun.
Yes.
Okay. Active listening. That active listening involves paraphrasing, summarizing, clarifying, but when you're summarizing, be careful not to introduce new ideas. You're just summarizing what you were told. Snowballing. Snowballing is a technique where you sort of let things take you where they want to go, like a snowball falling down a hill. You might be interviewing someone, and then you can ask them, who else should I talk to? And then they might lead you someplace else that you would not have otherwise gone. Or what else should I look at? So you sort of let things take you where they will. Use tell me more. Just as people are talking, just tell me more, as simple as that. And then avoid anchoring bias or any prejudgment. And anchoring bias is when we let our initial impression or the initial information we get anchor us, and then we can't see other things. I was on one event review once where a patient was given a medication for which they had a documented allergy. And we figured that out just right away. Wait, there's in the chart allergy, but they were given this medication. It turned out that that in fact had happened, but that hadn't caused the harm. And if we had stopped there, we would have missed the opportunity to find, we ended up finding another error that had caused the harm. But we would have missed it if we had just stuck on documented allergy, given the medication anyways. Okay, who to interview? So you want to interview everyone involved. You might want to interview people in the same role, but who weren't involved. And then, of course, you want to interview the patient and family, because they were likely the only ones there through the entire course of events. They're the constant through the whole stay or the whole, they have valuable information that you really have to get at. Also remember that valuable information can come from anyone at any level. I did a review once on a spike in C. diff. And honestly, the information I got from environmental services and the transport folks was just as valuable as the information I got from the director of infection prevention, probably more valuable. So don't limit yourself in who you talk to. Okay. So you'll do all the interviews, but you also need to review. You need to review the chart. You need to review maybe policies and procedures. I want to warn you a little bit about policies and procedures, because that comes back to the work as imagined versus work as done. I did one review where a leader kept saying, but what's in the policy? But what's in the policy? The policy says that's a nursing responsibility. And the reality is, at that point, it didn't matter what the policy said. What mattered was what had happened. But it's still good for you to know if there's a policy, what the policy is, if there's a procedure, what the procedure is. But more important to know what's actually happening than what's in a policy or procedure. Screens on the EHR, I mean, sometimes those will be helpful to you, not just what's in the record, but what people see. Observe the location that it happened. Observe what the circumstances are. Is it busy? Is it loud? Is it what's going on in the physical environment? What's the capacity of the unit? What's the census of the unit? What's the acuity on the unit? I'm assuming we're talking about an event on a unit, but just get a feel for what you see. Understand the typical workflow. Understand what typically happens, and then that'll help you potentially, or you'll know to investigate what happened in this case and why non-typical happened in this case. I have another example here. Oh, okay. So my example is about, as much as you're going to review and observe and understand, it's going to always come back to talking to people and understanding what really happened. So we did one event review where we started with the medical record, and we saw that a physician had prescribed a medication, gotten an allergy alert, overrode the allergy alert, and wrote in the chart that the benefits outweighed the risks. So that was a problem, potentially. But then we started talking to people, and what we found was the medication had been administered in a chaotic ED under a verbal order. And the medical record was, it wasn't until later that the physician had time to go back to the medical record, and then that's how she ended up documenting it. So a different problem. And if we had just focused our review on the documentation, we would have missed that. Okay, now I'm really going to pull out my little cheat sheet here because I want to talk about all the things, all the system-type considerations that you should think about when you're doing an event review. And both of the tools that I've referred to a couple times now, the Candor tool and the RCA Squared tool, both of those have a list of questions or a checklist that you can go through, but I'm just going to run through some things now. So think about the demands of the task. Did it occur during a period of high workload? Was there time pressure? Was the team in a hurry? Did they have to perform multiple tasks simultaneously or constantly switch between tasks? On the other end of the spectrum, was it a monotonous task? Was it something that they're just doing the same thing over and over and over again? Was there clear guidance on what needed to be done? Is there a procedure? And if there is a procedure, is it workable? So I did a review one time with a resident who was given a handbook by the service that he was on to make a dosing calculation. And the handbook was in milligrams per hour, and the infusion pump was in micrograms per kilogram per minute. So not that someone's not capable of making the conversion, but just the potential for error was introduced right up front. What's the care process like, and how might that have contributed? What was the staffing ratio? Was the staffing ratio appropriate? What was the patient load like? I work with one nurse on event reviews fairly frequently, and she is so good at getting at the nursing perspective. How many patients did you have? How sick were they? What were you having to do for your patients? How busy was everyone else? Were all caregivers qualified for the tasks that they were performing? Was the team experienced? We had another case where a nurse, an ICU nurse, 9 months experience, was giving high-risk medication for the first time on a night shift with a resource nurse who was on her first ever resource. It was the first time ever she had been a resource nurse. So, inexperienced team, potential contributor there. Was anybody working extended shifts? Were there distractions or interruptions? Anything out of the ordinary? Anything different from usual? Were they using workarounds? I've mentioned workarounds a couple times. And I don't know if you consider workaround a dirty word, but I think that it's a huge opportunity to learn what's going on. If people are doing workarounds, they're doing them for a reason. And that's a great opportunity to improve something in your system.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
Resource nurses, I don't know what a workaround is, those are nursing terms, I'm a physician. Maybe you can fill me in. A resource nurse is somebody who's hired from another agency?
No, resource nurse. So we use the term resource, a charge nurse. Does that help? So one of our hospitals is unionized, and we can't call them charge nurses anymore. But it's the nurse in charge on the floor who often doesn't have her own patients, his or her own patients. Sometimes they do, depending on staffing, but they're in charge on that shift. And work around. Yeah, that's not even a nursing term. That's kind of a human factor. Well, I mean, it's the way I'm supposed to do something doesn't work for me, so I work around it. I can't. Honestly, perhaps somebody could give an example. What's a clinical? Yeah, throw the box.
It's like a shortcut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it, thank you.
Sort of a non-sanctioned shortcut. Not a, oh, this is a great way to save time, but yeah, sorry about that. Stop me any other time I'm using lingo.
Well, yeah, Kelly, and the other piece, if the workaround becomes the norm, The term we use, which is super important in human factors and patient safety, is it's called the normalization of deviance. When the deviant behavior becomes the norm.
Great point.
And that's why this event review stuff is so important. You want to find out, has this workaround actually become the norm? And that's why I love, Kelly, what you said is, even interview people who weren't part of the event. So there you're kind of validating, wow, they're all doing it. So that means we designed a policy that can't be followed or isn't going to be followed because it's too easy to work around and it's too hard to follow it.
Right.
So it fits all the way back to what you said. Yeah.
I think Michelle had a really great illustration for the providers in the room. One of the things that we would consider a workaround would be when you have in your electronic health record and a pop-up box comes on, and a lot of times we have that for sepsis alert and things like that, but if you're desensitized to that, you just look past it, you keep clicking. So that's
Overrides.
Yeah,
Yep.
we tested that at U of I when I was there briefly to show how quickly people click through that. We put a message on the alert that said, if you're reading this, call our office for your $20 gift certificate. And it took 2 weeks before we got a call.
Wow.
And it popped up at least 1,000 times. So that's the normalization of deviance. It's just, you don't have time to read all these, you click it, it goes away, and you do that part. That was a fun little study to do.
So one of the things that I'm thinking about here is when you have a normalization of deviance, that should cause you to say, let's go back and look at our policy. Because if you've got a tree and you've got a path around the tree and everyone's cutting through, maybe we really need to think about putting a path through.
Exactly.
Right?
No, absolutely. That's the, and hopefully through the case we're going to talk about today, Stephen, we're going to see some of that and get to some of that.
Well, it's also feeling empowered. I got a mic on too, right? But it's also feeling empowered as providers to step up and say that.
And that comes back to the just culture. And that comes back to the more you treat things as systems issues and don't blame people, the more empowered they feel, the more comfortable they feel raising an issue like, and that's, maybe a workaround is potentially a near miss waiting to happen, right? I mean, it hasn't necessarily happened yet, but yeah, great points. Physical environment, could that have played a role? Things like lighting, overhead paging, even slippery floors, anything about the physical environment. Were there communication issues? And not just communication issues between people, but do caregivers have all the information they need to make their decisions? I participated in one event review where we had a charge nurse, nursing leader, call us because one of her nurses had, she'd given heparin the night before a scheduled surgery the following morning. There was an order in the chart, but it had conditions on it. It had only to be given after certain. And fortunately, the surgeon caught it, and so the patient did not go to surgery, but the surgery was postponed. The surgeon was upset. The patient was upset. And so this nursing leader called us in and said, and honestly, I think she was looking for an excuse to fire the nurse. I think she was like checking her boxes. I'm going to get human factors to say, yes, in fact, she acted recklessly. So she called us in, she showed us, she said, look, here's the order, here's the condition. She claims she didn't even see it, but look, it's right here. So we brought in some other nurses, and we say, how do you know when you need to give a medication? And they said, well, we go to Care Compass. All of them, consistently, we go to Care Compass, we go to Care Compass. So that's their task list in our EHR. So we pull up Care Compass. In Care Compass, the note that the physician wrote, the only way you see it is next to the order, there's a teeny tiny little icon that looks like a Post-it. If you hover over the Post-it, you can see the condition. And so, honestly, this one was a happy ending for that nurse because the leader said to us afterwards, I'm so glad I talked to you guys before I talked to her, because I would have disciplined her for sure, potentially fired her. So communication is not just the communication, though that's very important, and that's another thing to look at is their standardized communication, but also just information flow. Does the caregiver have the information they need to do their job? Is the medical record accurate and up to date? Are there barriers to communication, like language barriers or technology barriers? Is the team familiar with each other? Was there a huddle? Or an orientation or a brief? Was there a device involved? And when I say device, I'm including your EHR, technology. Was all the necessary equipment available? Does the staff know where to find it? Does it have appropriate alarms or indicators? Was it functioning properly? Was the preventive maintenance up to date? All things you can look at to do with a device. So after you've done your interviews, after you've reviewed, after you've considered all those system factors, now it's time to identify contributing factors to the events, causal factors. And the RCA squared tool has 5 rules for causal factors. One is clearly show cause and effect. Rather than say the resident was fatigued, say the resident is scheduled for 80 hours, and as a result was fatigued, and that increases the likelihood of missing something. Use accurate descriptors rather than negative terms. So rather than say the manual's terrible, say the manual's in 8-point font, and it has no illustrations, and so nobody uses it. Don't stop at human error as a cause. There's a strategy called the 5 whys, where it says you should ask why 5 times. So, patient was discharged home with an infection. Why? Well, because the discharging physician didn't know the lab cultures came back positive. Why? Rather than stop at discharging physician made a mistake. Why? Well, it's hard to distinguish on the EHR, on the lab page. It's hard to tell what's abnormal. Why? Well, because it's inconsistent. It's, some values, if it's abnormal, it's displayed one way, and other values, it's displayed another way, so it's just hard to distinguish. So I think I only asked 3 or 4 whys, but you get the idea. So don't stop at someone made a mistake. It was human error. I think that's another lesson from aviation and even nuclear power. They don't stop at human error. You keep going. Human error is not a root cause. Violations of procedure must have a preceding cause. Don't say the tech didn't follow the procedure. Say there were production pressures. And so that increased the likelihood that a step might be skipped. And then failure to act is only causal if they had a pre-existing duty to act. So don't say the nurse didn't check vitals every 2 hours unless the nurse was charged with checking vitals every 2 hours. Oh. I've come to the end abruptly.
Yes, you have. Awesome.
I wanted to keep sharing.
Well, you're going to have a chance for lots more sharing. So before we go to the break, in about 15 minutes or so, we're going to start off with the case, and then I want to have a little bit of conversation about the medical records. But Kelly, that was great. So much of what she said is going to apply to what we're now going to talk about. It's a real case. It actually happened at the University of Illinois, as I mentioned to you, and it was one of the last big cases that Dave Mayer and I worked on before he went to MedStar. So thank you.
Yes,
and then
of course.
we'll go through a little bit of this, and then But I got to tell you, and I don't know, Stephen, you or Kelly, how you feel about it. How do you feel about your face being up there on the screen?
I
on
don't
either
like it.
side? Yeah,
whenever I turned
I'm
around, I was
I'm
really
okay
quick
with
to
it,
go.
and for the interviews, it's going to be really good. But I got to tell you a story related to this. So, I was asked to do a keynote at the big respiratory care convention that was out in San Francisco, and there are 5,000 people in the audience, and that screen is about 100 feet high. And I'm looking at myself realizing there's a nose hair that on that screen is this big. And I totally freaked out. I left the stage, I went to the washroom, I took care of it, and I came back because I was completely freaked out. These things are very, honestly, it's, whatever, we'll live with it. It'll be really good for the interviews though, because hopefully you'll be able to see, from our actors, because they're going to play the role of the nurse and the doc. You're going to have to interview in this case. And then they're going to play the role of the family members. You got to have the conversation with at the end doing that. So the facts of the case. Oops. I got to go back. There. So this is a real case. And lay the facts out now. Now, did all of you print out and do you have copies of the medical record? Okay, because we're going to go through some of those as well. Before we go into break, because that kind of stuff is really going to help lead into what are some of the things you're going to want to know. So this was a 53-year-old woman who came into the University of Illinois with myasthenia gravis. As you know, with myasthenia gravis, it's an antibody problem that inhibits the ability of the normal transmitters to have your muscles work. So you get very, very weak because of this antibody. And when you get very, very weak, what kind of problems do you end up having? Respiratory, so trouble breathing. What else is often a real big problem with somebody who's got bad myasthenia gravis? They can fall. What else? Swallowing is troublesome, and they can aspirate. So they have trouble swallowing, they can't walk so well, and there's respiratory problems. One of the treatments of that in the severe cases is to bring the patient into the hospital, put a big old catheter, dialysis catheter, in a large vein, and do what's called plasmapheresis. So what they do is they're taking all the blood out, they're filtering out that antibody, and then they're bringing it back in. And they just keep doing that every other day. They go down to almost like getting dialysis to have this plasmapheresis done. And that's what we did for this patient. It was every other day for 10 days. She gets this treatment, and it's kind of like a miracle. Talk about miracles, Stephen. It is when you see somebody who can't walk, almost can't breathe, and is drooling and almost needs to get trached on a ventilator, to see them get so much rapidly better, it is really a miraculous thing to do it. And it's miraculous for the family to see, oh my God, she's getting super much better. So she is better. She's ready to go home. The team decides that, hey, since she's ready to go home, we got to take out this dialysis catheter. And so one of the young docs who's on the team and working in that unit is asked to take the dialysis catheter out, goes in the room, lays the patient down, for the most part, follows, as you can tell from the chart, follows the protocol, pulls the line out, and very shortly thereafter, the patient's eyes roll back, loses consciousness, goes into cardiac arrest. Call for help, code team comes, they're able to restart the heart, get a blood pressure, get a heart rate back. She's not waking up though. And then they urgently transport her to CT and MRI. CT MRI shows that air had somehow gotten entrained in. In other words, there's a big hole in the neck because of the catheter. The way you prevent air from going in, as you know, is to put pressure on it. So when the patient takes a breath, they don't suck ambient air, in the room, into the vein, into the heart. That's the hope. But somehow that's happened. But more importantly, she also has a patent foramen ovale. Why is that important? Because when the pressure builds up on the right side of the heart, the PFO opens and it goes to the left side of the heart, which meant the bubbles went up the carotid. So there's basically air embolism to the brain, in addition to the lungs. This is a plane crash. This is, in the life of this family and that patient, this is equal to the plane falling out of the sky. And you can see the cursory review of the medical records you have don't really indicate issues related to this line getting pulled out. Ultimately, she dies. She gets airlifted. This is who brought the point up about critical access aid. So this is one of those kind of we don't have hyperbaric oxygen at U of I. And one of the treatments of this to treat an air embolism is hyperbaric oxygen. So she gets airlifted to a hospital about 12 miles away, from U of I, kind of on the north side. But despite hyperbaric oxygen, she dies. Lots of interesting issues to think about, because remember, you're gonna have to talk to this family after you learn everything. And they will have conversations with people at the other hospital. So that's just kind of one of the things to think about. So one of the first questions I have, and I want to follow up with what Kelly said, is in that immediate crash, like the GO team with NTSB, where they show up right away to do 3 big things. This is part of the GO team. The GO team at MedStar has 3 huge functions. One of them is the event review part. Get the stuff right away. Don't lose any critical information. Begin interviews. Kind of start beginning to process map the whole piece out and do that part. What are the other 2 big parts of the GO team? Well, there's that part too related to event review. What I'm getting at is it kind of goes back to Candor, which is it's also the caregivers are freaked out of their minds and are going to need support, but also as the family. So the sense of urgency, the ability, this is when we get into operationalizing, what I want to get at with you kind of right now, and we'll get ready to toss the box around. Do you currently have a process in your organization where you can have people reacting within 15 to 30 minutes? That, I can't tell you how critical that is. It's critical for patients and families. Why is it so critical in this case that you're going to have a super rapid response for the patient and family? What is going to happen here where, this gets back to how do you make sure you include the family in this or the patient in this? Why is that so important in this case? You're going to lose them. They are going to want to go. They're going to want to find a way to get to this other. Once they hear there's going to be an air transport, they're going to try to get there as fast as possible. And as a hospital, we helped them. It's like, yeah, you do need to get there. So this rapid response is really, really important. What is the other reason why the really rapid response, going back to kind of what Kelly said, is so important in this kind of case? You take the box so they can hear saying good stuff.
I think I'm thinking building trust and relationship with these people.
With a family.
Yeah.
So for sure on that part, totally agree. The other part you're going to want to do, yeah, so I'll repeat what you said. So you need a relationship with the other hospital, right? To be able to share with them, explain what happened, and you want to get feedback from them. So you also want to maintain trust with the other hospital, from doing that. What are some other reasons why that the rapid response is related to the family is you're going to want to, like we did in the first workshop, this is a plane crash. So you want to maintain trust. You want to have that empathic conversation, but you also want to set up the next conversation. Remember, like Bruce talked about, the whole notion of those people who can communicate rhetorically is you're setting up the next conversation. And that's what happened in this case. Within 30 minutes, our safety risk manager was there, met with the husband, and was able to talk to him. What do you know? What did you hear? What do you see? Just, help me share what your experience was. Now you're gathering information. You're not doing an interrogation side. You're just really saying, share with me, what you saw, kind of what was happening, because it's my job to try to help, figure this piece out. And then gives her card to the husband and says, I'm going to be in touch. And if you need anything, you can call me. So they kind of exchange information. That, in this case, as you will hear, was crazy valuable, from that standpoint, to have that rapid response. What's another reason, again, in this case, I think you kind of were getting at it, that getting there very quickly might be important, particularly on the event review piece. And what happens if you wait till tomorrow? What's that? Patient's gone. What else is gone? What else is gone? Well, the people involved, absolutely. So there may be that piece. What else is gone? Absolutely. The line is gone. What did they use to take the line out is gone. All that stuff is gone. Because the other thing I would add to what Kelly said is, and Stephen, I don't know if you guys would do this in the military doing it. When we do our interviews, we often use devices to say, show and tell. Here's the device. Show me what you did and how it was. And if I have the device and I know exactly what it is they used, that's super helpful. When you can go. So you'll lose all this stuff. Other stuff that you will lose, this is my experience in the operating room, we're much better at capturing it now. But if you, in some monitors still, you turn the monitor off, you use the data. Once you shut it off, ventilators, for example, some of them retain it for a while, but there's some ways you can shut it off or do it, you lose the data. So there's so much here why you need a rapid response. Which organizations here have a system in place where if this plane crashes, you really are able to activate whoever your people are who are going to do the various pieces of it? You guys, can you share what would happen in your organization if this kind of case happened?
Well, the supervisor would be aware, and then they would call the administrator on call.
Mm-hmm. And then what would happen?
And then the decision is made, do we need to come in? Do we need to mobilize and come in? And then go through these things we've talked about.
Do you have a team of people like Kelly talked about where in that call teaming, okay, here's...
We don't have a robust team. A lot of times it starts with me and the nurse manager or the supervisor. Yeah. So I think we have a gap there.
Yeah. How about others? Any process currently in place to rapidly respond? Because again, it's a three-part piece. Support the caregivers, communicate to patient and family, and then begin the event review. And that's why I love the concept of the GO team. What we have talked about, and Kate, you and I talked about this a little bit, and we're working out this model a little bit in Oregon, is to create almost regional GO teams, that are connected to multiple hospitals. So when you get the call, you've got a hotline number you can call, and then you can get these resources. Because this is as Kelly said, this is a special set of skills. You're going to see that, later on this morning of how to do the interview, how to pull all this sort of stuff together. Yeah.
Who do you meet with first if you're looking at criticality of who you should be assessing or where you should go first with this triad approach?
Yeah, so part of it is driven by context and the piece of it. In this case here, because we know they're being transferred, we need to get to the family right away. So part of it is the priority list that Kelly talked about. You triage it. So who do I need to get to, sort of as quickly as possible?
So it shouldn't matter if you don't have all the facts. The idea is just to touch base with the family with what you know.
Yep.
Say we'll be in touch. Okay.
And we'll be in touch because as Kelly said is, when you start doing some of these interviews, boom, oh my gosh, I should ask the family that.
Yeah.
So if you've set it up, you can circle back and say, hey, I just want to talk to you, and there's some other things I'd like to ask you to do that. But the order isn't as important as the comprehensive nature of who it is that's important to talk to. Okay. In this particular case here, just to prepare you for it, the first person you all will have a chance to interview up here on the stage will be the nurse who's involved in pulling the line. The second person will be the physician who is actually there. And the hope is through those interviews, you'll now have gathered a lot of information to really think about a lot of the other stuff that you have in there. But and what we did is our point person for the event, because that's who we'd assign right away, a person who's now the quarterback for everything. And it kind of goes back to who's that core team. So they're the ones making sure the interviews are happening. They're the one kind of thinking about, okay, can you pull these policies and procedures, protocols? They're doing, get the record out, all that stuff. They're making sure these are happening. They use a checklist, and one of them is the family. You're kind of asking, how do you do that? Because often we forget. And particularly in a case like this, you want to be able to touch base with the family for so many reasons. And that conversation is not like an interrogation at all. And there's some really great stuff published by Eric Thomas out of Texas, who's done a ton of work. And he published that if you and I don't know if you're familiar with that data, Kelly, but if you interview the family, you are likely to find at least 3 more contributory causes than if you don't. It's really cool data to show, and as Kelly said, because they're the ones there all the time doing that, so that's super helpful. So let's talk about the medical record. So again, this is the piece of it. Interested to know what concerns you have at the medical record. We talked a little bit about what your organization would be. Again, for Candor, given all these components of it, and we'll talk about this afternoon, it's really good to begin to hardwire, what your hardwired process is going to be. So any concerns, questions you have about the medical record, which really is an extraction of what was really there. Yep. Yeah.
Yes, I always look at the date time stamp on the entries, each of the entries in the record, because really what I'm looking for is, I want to make sure there wasn't something added later.
Mm-hmm.
And if so, I want to make sure that we could defend that in the case that we would potentially need to. Why was that added?
Yeah. Yeah, no, the metadata is really important, especially go back and look at versions.
Right.
Here's the first draft, here's the second draft, here's the other. Some EMRs are much better than that. But no, that's a really great thing to do. I never realized till I started doing event reviews that when it comes to even radiology reports, I had no idea you could see every single version the radiologist created. Seriously, by right-clicking on it, going up and looking at it, you'd see it like go through 12 iterations and exactly what was added when. I had no idea. That was a good thing to know. There's a lot of plaintiffs' attorneys who don't know that either. Yet, because that's part of the data. Any questions, concerns, or other stuff that's related to the medical records that we provided? What do you think of the nursing note? What's that?
The nursing note, the patient plan and care note that the nurse wrote said the line was removed without complication.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
It's wrong.
Well, it's not an accurate reflection of what you now know, but go back to what Kelly said is, when that nurse wrote that note, you need to give him the benefit of the doubt that it made sense to write the note that way when they wrote it. Mm-hmm. This is this non-judgment piece. You know what I mean? Stay away from this. Just go, wow, this is an interesting note in the context of a cardiac arrest happening after that. Mm-hmm. That's going to be an interesting interview, so keep that thought, because you're going to have a chance to talk to the nurse, because he'll be up here after we have the break. You'll be able to do that. So really, really, really good point. Thanks for picking that up. Anything else in the records that you saw that you find a curiosity? Because again, one of the goals of looking at the record is if you do it this way, some people do, some people don't. Do you recommend, Kelly, reviewing the record before you do the interview? Some people say no, go in there kind of cold, so you're totally open-ended. Others say, wow, I better review the record so I have a little more understanding of what it is that happened.
So I would say it's context dependent, but my own personal, I do not have a clinical background. So I typically would do event reviews with a partner who does have a clinical background. I would rather talk to people first because I don't know my way around the record like they do. My partner would often go to the record first, just to sort of get a feel for what happened and what's been documented. Mm-hmm. But for me personally, I'd rather talk to people because the record doesn't make as much sense to me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
There is one note on the plasmapheresis note where they said the patient had tolerated that last treatment well and that they suggested be their last treatment, but that if the central line is to be removed, removal should wait until tomorrow.
Awesome. What do you think that means?
Well, it kind of sounds like, let's leave it in just in case we need it for some purpose unknown to us now. But then it gets removed that same day. And you can't tell exactly the time from when that note would have been written to the time
lovely. Perfect.
When the event occurred. I mean, you can't tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And by the way, it's a junior physician note, it's actually not a resident physician note for purposes of today. In the real case, and we'll get into that more, it actually was a learner who was part of it. So that is a really good important thing on the plasmapheresis note, that the recommendation is to pull it out the next day, from that standpoint. So it's time for break. And Kate, so what we're going to do, we're going to take a break. We'll come back from break. And then I want Stephen to introduce this sepsis video that he and another patient advocate made, which is super cool because it's just a great way. It's why we're here, which is how can you learn from events like a tragic sepsis outcome, really learn from it, and then redesign it with the patient and family in the middle. So again, it's one of those really cool things here. So take a break. Let's come back in 15 minutes. What would that be, like 10:17? If you all get in here, maybe we'll start the video a little bit earlier, and then we're going to jump into some more stuff about cognitive interviewing. And then you get a chance to practice. Yeah.